shows Phil Hartman in a tuxedo standing on a stage in front of a closed curtain. Hartman: "Hello, I'm Troy McCuss. You may remember me from game shows such as Gilligan's Survivor Island and the Brady Bunch Bachelorette Hour. Today we have the inaugural SNL Fantasy Death Pool, where current dead former SNL cast members will select who they believe will be the next former or current SNL cast member to die. But before we start, first some context to our SNL Fantasy Death Pool. There are currently 15 former SNL cast members who are deceased. However, only 7 of those 15 are deporatory players. Belushi, Farley, Hartman. Hartman coughs and stops and waits for applause that never comes. Hartman, as well as Hooks, McDonald, Radner, and Vance. The other 8 former cast members, Peter Aykroyd, George Coe, Tom Davis, Gilbert Gottfried, Michael O'Donoghue, Charlie Rocket, Tony Rosato, and Dan Vitale, are all here to compete to join the deporatory players. The curtain is drawn and shows the 8 dead former SNL cast members, each sitting in a square of a large 2x4 rickety Hollywood Squares type of set. Hartman: "How the game works is this. All 8 contestants will choose the next former or current SNL cast member to die. Each former or current living cast member can only be chosen once. We have determined the order of the draft by seniority of having joined the show, with amount of years dead being the tiebreaker when contestants debuted simultaneously. Again, whoever wins will get to join the deporatory players. If the next former or current SNL cast member to die is not one of the 8 chosen, then none of our contestants will join the deporatory players. Since Michael O'Donoghue was on the original cast and died 11 years before George Coe, he gets the first pick. Shows O'Donoghue, who says, "I'm going with Chevy Chase. I don't know how he made it into his 60s with all of that cocaine." A plastic tombstone with Chevy Chase's name on it is slowly and awkwardly lowered from a string down to O'Donoghue, who eventually grabs it. Hartman: "Okay, with the first pick, Michael O'Donoghue has selected Chevy Chase, who has somehow lived long enough to have to endure a Fletch remake. George Coe has the second pick. Coe: "I'll go with the oldest man on the board, Garrett Morris." A plastic tombstone with Garrett Morris's name on it is slowly and awkwardly lowered from a string down to Coe, who eventually grabs it. Hartman: "And with the second pick, George Coe has selected Garrett Morris, the first African American to somehow survive the SNL cocaine epidemic to live into his 80s. Tom Davis has the third pick. Davis rolls his eyes, sighs, and says, "I'll select Franken." A plastic tombstone with Al Franken's name on it is slowly and awkwardly lowered from a string down to Davis, but it gets stuck halfway down. Hartman: "Can we get some skirt backstage to just give these gentlemen a tombstone? Jesus." Jan Hooks hustles out onto the set and hands Davis a plastic tombstone with Al Franken's name on it. Hartman: "Okay, and of course, Mr. Davis chose his dear frenemy, Al Franken, with the third pick. Peter Aykroyd has the fourth pick. Aykroyd: "What the hell, I'll go with Danny Boy." Gilda Radner comes out and gives Aykroyd a plastic tombstone with Dan Aykroyd's name written on it. Hartman: "If you win, we'll have 2 deporatory Aykroyds. Good God. Anyway, Peter's power play to join the deporatory players has him pick his brother, Dan Aykroyd. Charlie Rocket has the 5th pick. Shows Charlie Rocket not paying attention. Hartman, Mr. Rocket? Rocket, yeah? Hartman, it's your selection. Rocket, I'll go with Gilbert Gottfried. Hartman, Gilbert Gottfried is already dead and has the following pick. Rocket, in that case, I'll go with Don Novello, the oldest on the board. Denitra Vance runs out and gives Rocket a plastic tombstone with Don Novello's name on it. Hartman, okay, with the 5th pick, the Rockets select Don Novello. Maybe Father Guido will give him last rites. With the 6th pick, as previously mentioned, is Gilbert Gottfried. Gottfried, since it's the only way to get that poor bastard off The Simpsons, I'm taking Harry Shearer. Jan Hooks runs out and gives Gottfried a plastic tombstone with Harry Scherer's name on it. Hartman, take it from me, the only way you're allowed to leave The Simpsons is by death. So after Gottfried's pick of Shearer, it's Tony Rosado with the 7th pick. Rosado, how old is that Andrew Dismukes guy on the show now? He looks like he's George Burns. He's so old looking. Hartman, okay, very good. And your selection? Rosado, you didn't answer the question. How old is Andrew Dismukes? Hartman yells backstage, girls! Gilda Radner runs out and says, Andrew Dismukes is 27. Rosado, 27? Maybe his dentures are 27. Anyway, I'll go with the oldest left on the board then, Brian Doyle Murray. Radner gives Rosado a plastic tombstone with Brian Doyle Murray's name on it. Hartman, after Rosado chose the mayor of Puxatawny with the last pick, it's now Dan Vitale. We hope. Dan, are you okay? Vitale, I'm fine, Troy. Hartman, are you sure? Vitale starts to sweat and says, just let me make a pick already, Jesus. Hartman, go ahead. Vitale relaxes and says, I'm going to go with Emily Prager. Vance runs out with a plastic tombstone with Emily Prager's name on it. Hartman, well, hold on a minute. I'm not sure this is a legal selection. Miss Prager, when credited, did not appear on Saturday Night Live. And the 5 times she was on the show, she was uncredited. I'm going to have to check the rule book. Cuts to 20 minutes later, with everyone looking frustrated and bored, while Phil Hartman thoroughly reads through a rule book. Finally, Hartman says, okay, based on Rule 57, subsection C7, Prager is eligible for selection. Vance gives Prager's tombstone to Vitale. Hartman, all right, folks, what a draft it was. And the winner is... Oh, shit, I guess it may be a while until we know, huh? This was a terrible idea for a game show. And dead from the earth, we're not alive. It's Saturday Not Alive, starring John Belushi, Chris Farley, Bill Hartman, Jan Hooks, Norm MacDonald, Gilda Radner, Denitra Vance, and many other special deceased contributors. Musical guest, Lyle Skitch Henderson, and your host, Johnny Carson. Everybody, here's Johnny. Applause, applause, applause. Carson. Thank you very much. some of you may know, when I'm not here helping this production lower the prestige of Saturday Night Live by osmosis, I host the Too Bad You're Dead Night show. Applause, applause, applause. We always try to book Amelia Earhart, but she always seems to miss her flight. But you know, one thing about being dead, you get to see how much things really do change. I mean, Strom Thurmond's good buddy Joe Biden as a black vice president. And Joe Biden as a woman vice president. I didn't think I'd ever see that. What else has happened I never thought I'd see? Donald Trump as president. I would have figured dictator overlord for him. But you know, as president, I don't think Trump was so bad. The audience starts to boo. Carson. Wow, how did so many liberals end up in the audience? Did the Republicans all have tea times at the country club or something? Anyway, Trump gets a lot of hate. Do you know why that is, Ed? Ed McMahon comes out from backstage and says, maybe because he's rich, Johnny? Carson. Oh, wow, well then. Maybe that's why I'm not getting much reception here from the audience. But if it's not because he's rich, I'm thinking it must be that red hair of his. In that case, Prince Harry better watch his back in Los Angeles. But speaking of Prince Harry, his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, just recently joined us in the afterlife. Applause, applause, applause. Of course, Princess Diana was there to document her arrival with a bunch of cameras and other paparazzi. Seemed kind of hypocritical. But these royals never seem to reincarnate. So Elizabeth went from queen to being 60th in line to the afterlife throne. So word on the street is, she's trying to get all of her predecessors to convert to Hinduism. Anyway, another thing I'd never think I'd see is me being announced by Don Pardo as Johnny Carson. Based on his former program, I figured he would have announced me as Carcinio. Carcinio. And you know, it's funny, SNL had a lot of fun at my expense through the years. You know, that I was old and no longer cool entertainment. Well, they were the new, hip, cool show. Now, to be clear, I was on the air for only 30 years. That old windbag on NBC on Saturday nights is almost 50. Lorne Michaels is going to have to go back in time over a decade to get Bette Midler to sing for him. Speaking of NBC, my old show, The Tonight Show, is still on the air. Applause, applause, applause. Now, since I left, the hosts have been Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien, Jay Leno again, and then Jimmy Fallon. So for those good at pattern recognition, who do you think's going to be next? Now, I think if Jay had his way, he'd be willing to double SNL and host The Tonight Show for 100 years. So if we're up to him on his 100th anniversary in 2092, my head in a glass jar could be his guest. I guess David Letterman's head in a glass jar couldn't make it. Folks, we have a great show tonight. We have as guests tonight both Helen Keller and Charlie Chaplin, so it should be riveting conversation. And our musical guest I'm very honored to have here is Lyle Skitch Henderson, the conductor of the Tonight Show Orchestra when I first joined the show. So stick around, we'll be back in a moment.